What's up, y'all? Danger Dave here with NC Scout in beautiful Yanceyville, North Carolina at the Brushbeater.store. Here today to cover a few subjects. The first one being, if you'll notice, we got some Pinnacle Foods here, North Carolina company, and we are a distributor for them.
Yeah, man, I'm a big fan of supporting local businesses, particularly here in North Carolina. Any North Carolina company that I can support, I am supporting my neighbors, and we're able to bring those to market. And, I can't stand to eat MREs, in the field. MREs all, like at a certain point, MREs kind of are all just the same. Like they just are. And freeze dried food has kind of been the standard, like for me, for a long time. Because once MREs, that's the only thing you have to eat. Like you're only getting one or two of those a day at best. After a while, the novelty wears off. So, yeah. Anyway, freeze dried foods. A lot of people talk about Mountain House and stuff, and I think Mountain House's quality has kind of fallen off in recent years. And so, I started looking at some of the other options that we carry in here in the store. Peak Refuel being one of them. I think Peak Refuel is excellent stuff. I was blown away by how good, how high quality, and the protein content they had in there. And then we had a guy come in the store about a month ago, a little over a month ago, came in and said, hey, have you heard of Pinnacle Foods? They're here in North Carolina. Originally, Pinnacle Foods was a Montana company and relocated to High Point, North Carolina. And so I reached out to the owner. He got back to me within the hour and was very responsive. We tried some of these meals in here. They are the best. I mean, this is the best freeze-dried stuff that I've had. I think that if you put this in front of me and I didn't know that it was a freeze-dried meal,
Yep.
It's good.
Their quality and taste on everything I've had from both Pinnacle and from Peak, like the white chicken chili. I mean, it's fantastic. It cooks in about 10 minutes. I mean, you put boiling water in it. You can use a coffee maker and just run hot water into it. Give it 10 minutes. I mean, the quality has not been a letdown in any way.
I mean, jalapeno cheddar biscuits, herb sausage gravy. That's one right here in the middle. It's good. It definitely will ruin that. If you're doing keto, it's going to ruin it.
Yep.
But it's that being said, though, there's very few things that boost your morale when you're in the field for an extended period of time than having a good high meal. Not just something that's warmed up, but a good high meal. And the roasted chicken and dumplings is my favorite of the bunch. It's extremely good. So
I think it's important to note too that while we're eating these out in the woods too, it's extremely calorically dense, and the protein is just. I mean, I think these normally run about 40 to 50 grams of protein per both servings.
Yeah,
I mean it fills you up, and it's.
Yeah, looking at this one right here, 54 grams.
Yep.
So
that's
a whole lot of protein.
Getting a whole lot of good energy out there.
Yeah, it's like I said. I mean, some of the competitors that are out there, the legacy brands that you'll know, I feel like their quality has really fallen off in the past few years. Mountain House, seems like after COVID, Mountain House changed their packaging, and they're just not that great. Backpackers Pantry, never really been a fan of them either. It's just way too much salt and not a whole lot else. A lot of salt, a lot of carbs, and not really anything else. But the cool thing is there's a lot of companies that are coming out that are putting out great products. And Pinnacle Foods, located here in North Carolina, just over in High Point, they're doing some great stuff. They're crushing it, and we're very proud to be offering their products.
Absolutely. Something I want to talk about too, moving away from products, is world events.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, Spain recently, the Iberian Peninsula has had a massive and sudden blackout, rolling blackout, which just now, today, they've seemed to kind of get a handle on, at least get power back to most people.
Yeah. There's a lot of conflicting stories about it. If you followed it on social media, as we did, you would have seen images of all the trains stopping, the people that were, out and kind of just destitute, and keep in mind, this was only like an hour after the event. But basically you're taking the normalcy of your entire world and turning it upside down. And now all of a sudden, there's no power, there's no explanation. Mass swaths of people have, no ability for mass communications. Turned into chaos. And we're talking about just a few hours into the event.
Especially now, we live in such a technologically dependent world. I mean, you have POS terminals, everyone's using cards, or they're using Apple, Google Pay. Once that POS signal goes down, most people aren't going to be paying with cash. And if they can, they really can't even receive it at that point.
Yeah, that was one of the more interesting points that was brought up. Was one of the guys that was posting social media say, cash was essentially worthless. I think that flies in the face of a lot of conventional wisdom in events like that cash is king. You brought up an important point that we are very heavily reliant on point of sale systems nowadays. That's just a fact. I don't foresee that there'll be a place in the United States that won't take cash in the near future. And I certainly don't advocate for cashless society by any means. Don't take that out of context. But the thing is that we are predominantly dominated, payment systems are dominated by point of sale systems. And so we laugh about this, but there really are idiots out there who can't do basic math. They're so used to the machines doing it for them that when you hand them money, actual money and not a card, they don't know how to give you proper change.
No.
You can't do the addition and subtraction in their head. It blows my mind. People are this stupid. But
I had a
they
guy
are.
at Food Line do that. I gave him a 20, and it wasn't like a hard equation. It wasn't. He had it on the screen, but he had to look at the screen, look at his hand, put a quarter back, look back at the screen, recount what he had. And then finally, after a minute of that, he gave me, I think, the correct change. I assumed it was.
See, you made a mistake. The fatal, you didn't count your change.
I needed to get out of there.
yeah, I knew that feeling too, where you're just like, look, it looks right. I am.
Yeah, the line behind me, I was like, I don't need the extra quarter. I'm sure you can put it to better use. I'll go my own way.
I'm just out of here. I'm done.
Yep.
I'm done seeing stellar parenting happening in the checkout line, and the girl 2 people back from you is having a meltdown on social media in the middle of it. It's like,
Someone's on the phone screaming at whoever they're talking to. It's great.
I'm out of here. I'm out. I'm done. Great things you see in your local food line. Also, like Walmart. It's like people of Walmart, but better.
Yes,
in some ways.
Somehow it's an improvement.
Just saying, I love Food Line. You get dinner and a show. But no, in all seriousness, with all the goings on in the Iberian Peninsula, the official narrative behind this, quote unquote, the official narrative was that there was some solar weather that impacted. Although I don't necessarily buy that. There wasn't a lot of solar activity happening on solarweather.com, which is a website that NASA runs. You can see the solar conditions. There wasn't anything indicating a solar flare that would cause a Carrington-style event. So it wasn't anything like that. And none of to my knowledge, the transformers themselves substations there weren't any relays that were burned out, which would happen with the Carrington stall event. So there wasn't any of that.
From what I've read, there was no indication that any sort of overload happened.
Right.
Just all they were able to say was that suddenly 60% of their power supply, which was solar and wind, went offline in the course of about 5 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And the remaining grid wasn't equipped to handle anything near that amount. And so everything just failed to save itself from catastrophic failure.
Yep, this is a cascading series of failures. I mean, we need to point out that Spain specifically served as a model for green energy initiatives in Europe.
The net zero initiative.
Yep, the net zero initiatives, which now Canada will be going whole hog on that as well. Elections have consequences, folks. Yep. But there you go. You know, and when you're now bottlenecking the resiliency of your grid system into single points of failure, essentially, that's what you have happen. Now, I'm not so sure that it wasn't a cyber attack, personally. I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary. Of course, I haven't really been looking that hard at it. I'm more concerned with the social consequences of it and what people can do to better prepare themselves, be better equipped for when something like that happens. It's not if, ladies and gentlemen, it's when. All right, we've seen this repeatedly in here in the United States. I don't know how many examples that we really need to be reminded of. That preparedness is not about having a whole bunch of stuff necessarily, or wearing a tinfoil hat, being paranoid about things. It's a skill set and it's a mentality of resiliency that's so much more doggone important. Yeah.
And I think people underestimate how quickly all of this can and will happen.
Yeah.
A lot of people go for the when they're getting into this community, especially, they get bought in with the high speed, low drag stuff. So running your AR, getting that kitted out, getting everything on it, which is definitely recommended. But at the same time, look at what happened in Appalachia. We had sudden flooding. Within a week's time, we had a ton of people displaced without running water, without a single food source. And those rifles are awesome if they had food storage, if they had communication grid already set up, a network of like-minded people. If they had laid the base work, a lot of it would have gone a little bit smoother. And that's something that we need to keep in mind in this community, is that
it's being realistic about things. I mean, with Hurricane Helene and its ramifications in Appalachia, and then the follow-on events that happened after that. I mean, the flooding in far western, southwestern Virginia that happened just a couple months ago. That was another thing that didn't really make big headlines outside of the region, but that was almost catastrophic in that area. And so it was a replay of the same type of damage that came from Hurricane Helene. Wildfires. We've seen the wildfires that have happened, ones that hit Los Angeles and have broken out in other areas. And it's just not a new thing, and it's not even so it's not a novel concept, but it's something that we're continuously going to be faced with, regardless of where you live, geographic location. You're not impervious to all the threats. Things are going to happen. And what I mean by preparedness mindset, I always go back to the winter of 1996. Here in North Carolina, we had a fairly large snowstorm come through, which we do get weather here. A lot of people, when I go to other regions of the United States, they seem to assume North Carolina never gets any snow or ice. It's like, nah, we get a lot. We actually get a lot here. And the further west you go in North Carolina, you get quite a bit more. But
North Carolina is great because it gets every type of weather
Yeah.
Every year you can
Yeah.
get just a
Yeah.
random ice storm, a random record, heat wave the next year, followed by a record, snowfall and cold the year after.
That's what the old timers here say. If you don't like the weather in North Carolina, wait 5 minutes, it'll change. But winter of 1996, we got hit with a very large snowstorm that took out power to significant portions of the state, particularly here in the central northern part of the state. And, I remember going to my granddad's house, and, we heated our house. When I was growing up, we heated our house with wood stove as a primary means of heat, and we had oil heat as a backup. But we had never, when I was growing up, we had never cooked on a wood stove. This wasn't something, but it's hard for us, the younger generations, to realize that just 2 generations removed from us, that was the only way a lot of people out here cooked inside of their homes, was either with a wood stove or coal stove. And so we go to my granddad's house, and the power's out. All right, whatever. He's cooking on his wood stove because he's just pounding and turning. That's just what he's going to do. Wood stove in his house is rocking. Gonna throw that piece of cast iron on there. Gonna throw a little lard over in there. Hey, it's time to cook. And I always think back to that. That was one of the neatest times of my childhood, was the fact that you could just do that. And later that year, we had Hurricane Fran that came through that took out, the eye wall still came through here as a Cat 1 hurricane. It made landfall as a Cat 3, and it just devastated this area in terms of damage. I think we lost power for at least 2 weeks after that. And yet again, it was the same story. So in that particular year, we were learning so doggone much about the importance of preparedness. And for me, that kind of laid the groundwork of, not being a prepper or a survivalist in terms of what typically is conjured in people's minds, but more of, hey, these things are going to happen and you need to be ready for them. And it's simple things like having quality tools on hand, being knowledgeable in how to use those. Do you know how to use a felling axe? Do you know how to use a chainsaw? Do you know how to harvest trees? What time of the year to properly harvest trees? That was all very important to lay the groundwork for how we cooked. In both of those events, by the way, both that blizzard that came through and then in Hurricane Fran, having seasoned firewood on hand to be able to cook food. And that was how we did it for about 2 weeks, during Hurricane Fran and then previously, and it was out of necessity too, because September of 1996, it was still hot, because it's still hot here up until the very tail end of September. And if you don't have power, all that stuff in your freezer, for us, we kill a cow every year. All of that beef in your freezer is going to go bad. You got to do something with it, So how are you going to cook it? You can't just eat it raw. It's all part of that preparedness mindset. And looking at Spain, there's we in the United States, we typically look at Europe, the old countries, as kind of, they have a way of doing things there. And you got to remember that Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, Italy, Germany, Britain, France, they all came up with ways of preserving meat and preserving foods. And a lot of the foods that they eat or ate traditionally, and brought a lot of that tradition to the United States, was built around those realities. right? Of living without refrigeration, living without power, living without all this stuff. And it's kind of a stark contrast to the way things are done nowadays, where Europe and a lot of European countries are kind of a model of efficiency in terms of power efficiency, transportation, and communication, and so on and so forth. And when they end up losing the grid, well, what are they going to do? They're kind of lost without it. And it's interesting because that culture now has shifted. In the United States, we at least used to do all those things as a lot of immigrants from those respective countries came in. We used to be able to do all those things. And we're not losing it, at least in my opinion, we're not losing those skills as rapidly as I think our European counterparts are, but we are losing them. They're diminishing. And when you look at other countries of the New World, like Mexico, for example, there's whole swaths in Mexico that still does everything the old way. They do everything the old way. I remember when I was living out in El Paso, there was an older lady. Well, she was an elderly lady. I was just call it what it is. But she had a whole business where she made sausage. And she made it the traditional German style, where you had traditional casing. So, either a sheep's casing or beef casing or pig casing. And she made her own sausage. She ground everything up. She did it in the kitchen of her house. And she had a menu that was laminated, and you just told her what you wanted, and she would make the sausage right there. It was incredible. And she would always have to turn people away. When she ran out of stuff, she'd have to turn people away. But it's those skills that are timeless. And she lived in just a little, very small house down in the lower valley down near Rio. And, you'd go down there and she'd be working in her basement. You'd walk around the back of the house, knock on the door, tell her what you wanted. And that's what I loved about El Paso. Loved that about El Paso was that those traditional skills were alive and well, whether it was food preparation, whether it was boot making, whether, leather working, saddlery, making clothing. It was so cool to see this, that it was like how my grandparents described life 2 generations removed, things that we used to be able to do, and they're still living in that style. And you see that across Mexico as well. Now, I always thought that was so cool, that you've got people that have that attitude that are very, very resilient, almost timeless. And you have all these things that happen, socio-political stuff that happens. You have natural disasters that happen. You got all this stuff, but their way of life isn't interrupted. Nope. It's not going to change, and they're not going to change just because modernization tells them to.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that the modern way that we have all the conveniences, all the benefits that we can, we have cell phones in our pockets that are supercomputers. We have the ability to freeze meat for an extended period of time, that all can go away instantaneously. Mm-hmm. And we need to be prepared in that case. Well, what are we going to do? What's our plan for this? What can we learn now before everything goes downhill that can benefit us as soon as it happens?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, food preservation and eating habits is a big part of that. Talking about freeze-dry food here, we've got that out there. Freeze-dry food is great as a short-term solution. But even though I don't necessarily envision a time absent the grid, I don't prescribe to that theory. I don't think that there's going to be, a magic day we wake up and, return to year zero kind of deal. I don't prescribe to that theory because humans are resilient, we're intelligent, and we're innovative. All people, everywhere is. And so where there is a necessity for something, there will be something to fill that gap. I don't think that the grid necessarily is going to go away. Now, it may get interrupted, for sure. So, with that in mind, the important step there is to dust off some of the old ways of food preservation and understand that, the ways that we did things 2 generations ago probably should make a strong comeback. Canning. Canning's something that, at least here in the South, every grandma did. Every grandma did. At the end of the harvest season, going towards Labor Day, you've got all of your vegetables that you've harvested from the garden. You've got meats that are left over from the salt box. That's why stew seasons are in the fall. You have them in the spring, but the big one is usually in the late fall. And, every fire department out here does that. But that's why it's what's left over from the harvest. And you do a smaller one in the spring, but it's all the stuff that you had canned that might be at risk of going bad by the end of the season. So you throw it all in the stew, cook it all out, and everybody has a good time. But, things like how the Italians, for example, perfected making salami, making pepperoni, cured meats that they hung to dry, figuring that kind of thing out. I mean, these were wet sausages that they had figured out how to dry and cure over time so that it would be shelf stable. Drying meats, keeping beans dry. So once you harvest them, drying them out and keeping them over time. The art of making sausages. I mean, just something as simple as using a hand crank sausage maker. I pulled out my granddad's old sausage grinder the other day. I was doing some stuff out in my stable and got his old sausage grinder, and I was just looking at it. His old cast iron sausage grinder, and he had a universal food chopper as well, and they're on their cutting boards. And so you cut the meat up, put it in, make that sausage. That was a skill that unfortunately he stopped doing when I was a very small child, so I didn't really learn that stuff. We got to kind of relearn those things. But that's something that these types of skills are timeless. They evolved for a reason. They are timeless, and they're ones that I think that people really ought to get back into.
Absolutely, and they evolved to be the most efficient versions of themselves through necessity. If you didn't dry and salt your meat, then you weren't making it through winter. So naturally, that became the mainstay that just worked. So I think definitely looking back at those examples of the most efficient ways people used to survive is the best chance that we have in case anything.
Oh yeah. I mean, food preservation is, in my mind, that's the top of the list. As a harbor against, starvation, there's a reason that you keep livestock on hand. If you're blessed enough to live in an area where you can keep livestock, you ought to be. One of the cool things that I think is happening now, and I see it in real time socially, is animal husbandry is coming back in a huge way, and they're doing it in urban areas too, which is really cool. If you go to any Tractor Supply or any farm to feed store, usually on Saturday mornings, it's almost like a live market out there where you've got chickens and they're selling them in the store, but you also have people that are just out there selling them out of the bed of a truck. I mean, I think that is one of the coolest things to see socially. That's what we have developing, and that's what's fostering. And what's really cool, and I know that we're gonna laugh about that. I get a kick out of it every time I say this or think about it, and I know probably some of y'all will too. Is in urban areas, they're having to put in ordinances now to keep people from raising chickens, like where and when they can raise them in urban areas. That cracks me up. Because these are people who know, okay, this is their circumstances here, where they are, they know that they don't have 50 acres to be able to raise cows or whatever. They're raising their chickens. And, if you're going to be breeding chickens, you got to have roosters.
Yep.
So you got your rooster out there, you've got your chickens, you've got eggs. Everybody, is talking about the price of eggs going up and everything. Well, hey, that doesn't really apply to a large swath of the populace now. And you know what's so cool about that is it's not just that people are becoming more self-reliant, or maybe it's a reflection of wanting to dust those ways, the old ways off. It's also a fact that people aren't necessarily trusting their food sources.
Yep.
They're saying, hey, I don't necessarily trust my food source. Like, if Big Pharma and ConAg Incorporated and whatever is playing around with the source of your food,
yep. Start
growing your own food.
And unless you're doing it and have a hand in every step of the way, you truly don't know what you're getting.
No.
Where your food's coming from. There's nothing to say they're not lying about every single thing they're doing. We're just going off the basis of, they said it's fine, so we have to trust them.
Trust the plan.
Trust the plan.
You got to trust the plan. If you just trust the plan. Trust the plan. Trust ConAgra. Just trust them. They got this.
They have our best interests at heart.
Your best interests at heart. Let's just eat everything out of a box. Let's just wonder why all these health problems start.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just, things that didn't exist 2 generations ago. Modern civilization, I'm not a Luddite in the sense that we should, not progress beyond where we are. But I will say, man, things like mass communications and the advent of social media, our over-reliance on the just-in-time food supply system definitely hasn't done any favors to society.
Nope.
Like, at all. We're not as friendly with one another. People say things on the internet that damn well get you punched in the mouth if you said it, and and now there's like a whole sport built around that. There's a whole genre built around that. How can I insult people the worst? Online, people say dumb things. Believe me, when I say something back to somebody online, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that to you in person. Like, hey, dummy, I would say that to them in person.
Yeah, well, the difference is the people you say that to wouldn't say that, if they walked in here. That's the main thing. It's easier to hide behind, your anime profile picture and talk smack about something that you have no skin in.
Oh, the anime profile picture. It's true, though. It's 100% accurate. Guys that... I'm not going to say it's anime is a gateway to very strange behaviors.
Strange is a very kind way of putting it.
Very eccentric behaviors that are not productive. And again, living in your mom's basement also isn't productive. So, slam! Ow! It's true. It's true. You show me a grown man that's all into anime, I show you a weirdo. That dude's just some weird stuff. That's some weird stuff.
Especially since 4chan's gone down, they've been out pretty heavily.
Well, I do miss it. Shia LaBeouf is he's. Yes, I know his name is not pronounced like that. That's just what I've always called him. He's probably most joyed by that. You remember that shit?
Absolutely.
Shia LaBeouf.
Oh, he had so
Come
many,
find my flag. Come
so
find my
many
flag.
and they did. Poor guy. He's a Disney kid. He's been through more than anyone ever should have. But poor guy.
Justin Bieber. Him.
Diddy parties. Yep.
Justin Bieber. They all those guys got famous for something.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't, the gatekeeping happened. Cat Williams was not lying to the world. in that podcast,
Yeah.
and then the subsequent ones where he was talking about, they don't get into, what we know about Epstein and everything. It's kind of, they don't get into the world. They do not get into that world without paying their dues somehow. There's gatekeeping that happens. So there's just saying.
Leave it on that.
Yeah, we'll leave it on that one, But it's Joe Rogan, tremendous, tremendous, and Cat Williams that'll be tremendous. I hope you enjoyed the team talk with diving into some of the more sustainment topics, survival topics. Check out forum.brushbeater.org, and of course, hit us up. We've got Radio Recon group over on Instagram. That is a group that you can join, push out a lot of content over there, share the videos. Of course, like and subscribe here on YouTube. Great to talk to you, and we'll be talking to you again very soon.
Yeah, and we have a couple thermal videos coming out soon, some night vision. We'll be up in Mountain Readiness the next few days. We'll take some content up there. So stay tuned for all of that. God bless, and start noticing.